Today's story comes from the Reddit user called PeaceSim. Strawman. I've been cooped up in my bedroom for nearly 2 days now. I don't know why they're taking so long. I tell myself that I'm just losing my mind, that I've had some sort of breakdown. But I know it's not true. I know what I saw, and I know what awaits me on the other side of the door. Let's start from the beginning. I'm a private person. I can think of a few people I enjoy being around. Margaret, for instance. I like Margaret, but generally, I value being alone. That's why I built my life around a job that doesn't require me to leave my crummy basement level apartment. The bug problem inside of it is preferable to the human problem outside of it. It all began on one of those abominable days when I needed to venture into civilization. I've been dreading it for weeks. My virtual coworker Natalie had been insistent about my attendance at a fundraiser for the kid. Something about raising money for some research foundation. Blowing off her relentless emails and messages eventually got too tiring. I ran a mental cost-benefit analysis and determined that a brief appearance would amass me to get enough goodwill to get out of it next time. As I exited my apartment building, I passed my fellow basement dwellers' seasonal decorations. The wreath on the door of my immediate neighbor, a repairman named Brian, included a ghost and a witch's hat. A mat by the door to the adjacent apartment, in which a young couple and their small child resides, featured black cats and a full moon. The surrounding neighborhood was just as insufferable. I scowled at the displays of pumpkins, of mock graveyards, skeletons, and spiderwebs. Oh, plastic, fake, straight from Walmart bullshit. I knew it was only gonna get worse in the lead up to Halloween. As soon as November 1st rolled around, they replaced the junk with equally obnoxious holiday decorations. I yearned for January. As the highway took me past the country line, I was stopped by construction. A man in an orange vest halted me and waved me for opposite traffic to go through a single lane open. Behind him, workers labored at the outskirts of a large pit. It was strikingly deep. From where I was sitting, I couldn't see the bottom of it. The delay made me late. When I reached the farm, its dirt lot was already packed with cars. I wedged my rusty sedan into a narrow space and climbed outside. A distant breeze swayed crops and trees. The only other sound I heard were those of birds and insects. I reached the field. Balloons were tied to a sign that reads, "Walking Against Diabetes." I shook my head. What did walking have to do with it? Couldn't they just have accepted my money without having to bring me all the way out here for walking? I looked around. The field ahead was littered with jack-o'-lanterns, cornhole boards, bales of hay, some sort of pumpkin ring toss. Oh, and scarecrows. Lots of scarecrows. Whoever decorated this place went a little overboard with them. But where were the people? A sign over a small tent read, "Registration." At a table inside, a figure obscured by shadows presided over several piles of paper. I approached. "Hey there, can you help me?" I froze when I discerned the straw hat and cloth face underneath it. The scarecrow wore blue overalls on a plaid shirt. Its face consisted of a red nose, blue eyes, and a simple smile drawn with a single black dotted line. I didn't smile back. Where was everybody? I wanted to at least sign in to the event. Hello? I called. My voice faded into the empty ambience. I tried again, this time shouting as loudly as I could, but nobody responded. I circled through the tents and the start of the 1 mile course, but there was not a soul in sight. I couldn't make any sense of it. Did everyone start walking and then just keep going to some other location? Or was the event cancelled at the last moment with me alone, not finding out about it? But if that was true, why was the parking lot so full? On the way back to my car, I passed the registration tent again. To my surprise, the scarecrow was gone. What the hell? I mumbled, perplexed and more than a bit spooked. My pace increased to a jog. I was eager to leave this place. There was something about it that just felt off. So wrong. I pulled out of my car and didn't look back as I returned to town. I approached the construction site. This time, no one was around to direct traffic. There were no workers at all, in fact. I could have gone, but I worried about a car approaching from the opposite side. I rolled down my window. "Hey, is anyone there?" I asked. Something caught my eye. Several bales of hay decorated the edge of the pit. They had been there before. No, they hadn't. Had they? For a moment, a brown, jagged stick emerged from the hay, reaching out like an arm before receding out of view. I resolved not to wait there any longer. I wanted to leave this cursed hole in the earth behind. Just like the farm and its deserted fundraiser. I jolted the accelerator and zoomed into the open lane. As I drove, I checked the rearview mirror. What I saw sent my heart racing. In the back seat, directly behind me, was a thin smile of a scarecrow. The one from the registration tent. "Fucking hell!" I screamed. My car skidded at an angle and I slammed on the brakes. Sirens blared in front of me. Just my luck. The first car, at the other end, belonged to a cop. The officer approached. I remained still, resisting temptation to look behind me. In my state of near panic, I accidentally rolled down one of the rear windows instead of my own. I rushed to correct my mistake as the officer neared. The officer leaned down and asked me questions. "Officer, in the back seat, there's... I realized that telling the truth wasn't going to help me, so I came up with a slightly more plausible story. "I'm driving alone, but I looked in the mirror and I saw someone in the back seat." I panicked. The officer peered behind me. There was no one there, she insisted. "Not even something that might look like a person?" I croaked. "Like a doll or something?" She shook her head, handed me a ticket, and informed me that I'd need to go to court to address it. I thought about telling her everything else I'd seen. The desolate fundraiser, the stick reaching out of the hay, but I decided to cut my losses. I politely nodded and told her that I'd be more careful next time. I examined my car before parking it in my building's garage. Indeed, the back seat was unoccupied. Had I imagined seeing the scarecrow there? Was I losing my marbles? In my apartment, I took a long shower and started to unwind. I decided to keep the inexplicable things I'd seen to myself, at least for the time being. I had Margaret to prepare for. I shaved my face and I put on my nicest set of clothes. I cleaned up, stuffing my dirty laundry into a basket and moving my laptop from where I'd left it on top of my comforter to the end table by the bedroom door. I counted out $55 bills and placed them in an envelope by the entrance to the apartment. Margaret was 5 minutes late. On other occasions, I'd have argued over subtracting $20 from what I owe her. 21, to be more precise. But that day, I was just happy to see her face. Margaret smiled and addressed me as her husband. She displayed a cheap replica of the engagement ring I'd give to Anne. And she wore an olive green dress, like the one Anne had been wearing when I'd proposed to her. Margaret didn't mention the children I hadn't seen in years. They weren't a part of the script. The hour moved efficiently. We chatted over a drink and then slowly made our way to the bedroom. We around, and when it was over, I wrapped my arms around her bare back and held her tightly. She asked me if anything was on my mind. She said that I seemed a little wound up. I started to tell her about the strange things I've seen this morning. When I brought up the mysterious pit by the highway, she mentioned that she's heard something about it. She said that a friend of hers worked on that site. Ever since his drilling operations tapped into some unknown substance deep underground, workers have been disappearing without a trace. Do they know what the substance is? I asked. She burst out laughing. She told me that she's really had me going. I was annoyed. But Anne's sense of humor was on the list of the traits I'd given her to study. I couldn't hold it against her. Margaret dressed and headed to the door. See you next week, I told her as she slipped the envelope into her purse. On Monday, I've exchanged chat messages with Natalie. She told me not to worry, that the participants had gathered around a hill at the end of the mile-long course for a group photo, but she appreciated the effort I made into coming there. It didn't make sense to me. I wasn't all that late. I should have seen somebody. But I let it go. Work resumed. Groceries arrived at my front door, my apartment building was quiet, the tedium of daily routine settled my nerves. The weird events of the weekend faded from my mind. Finally, the date of my ticket arrived. To my chagrin, I found that those obsessed with tacky Halloween prompts included whoever run the General District Court. Fake cobwebs lined the metal detector. The officers manning it directed me to the appropriate room. I climbed the central staircase. Posing throughout it were more of those damn scarecrows. I hated that smiling face, their straw hats, and the big red buttons that matched their small red noses. I approached the courtroom. After a short wait, an officer called the number on my ticket. Yes, that's me, officer. The officer instructed me on where to go. I opened the 2 sets of doors and stepped into the courtroom. I approached the podium, paying little attention to the handful of people scattered throughout the public benches. My eyes raised to the judge. I gasped when I finally got a look at him. I recognized the beaming face of the figure before me. It was the same one, the same goddamn scarecrow that had climbed into my car the other day. Except now it sat in a black robe right in front of me. Are you... I stuttered dumbfoundedly. I glanced at the persecutor's table. There were 2 scarecrows that were just sitting there in suits. I looked behind me and realized that the rest of the audience was no different. I was the only human in the entire room. I stormed out. I spotted the officer who'd let me in and called him out. When he didn't respond, I tapped his shoulder. I jumped back as his left arm detached. Tightly wound straws spilled out of his empty sleeve onto the floor. I backed up. I needed to leave. The figure moved. It knelt, picked up the detached arm, and stuck it back in place. Then it turned towards me, continuing to display the same sick expression of perpetual bliss. A stumble sent me toppling down the first set of stairs. I banged my head. My body ached as I climbed back to my feet and ran down to the lobby, where I found the metal detector manned by two scarecrows dressed in police uniforms. Their heads tilted slightly in my direction as I sprinted to the exit. There was almost no traffic as I drove back to my apartment. I spotted no people in the early evening light, only scarecrows everywhere. Of all shapes and sizes, they appeared still, silent, content. In the apartment garage, an elderly man hobbled over to me. He was the first human I've seen since leaving the courthouse. He pointed to a red bruise on my temple and told me that I'm not one of them. He insisted that I trust no one, not even him. I left him behind as I scrambled down the basement hallway. The door to my building elevator opened, revealing three scarecrows: a man, a woman, and a small child standing between them. I passed Brian's apartment. I looked through the door that was open inside. Two figures were engaging in a scuffle. A scarecrow had Brian pressed against the wall. His panicked eyes turned towards me as he attempted, futilely, to pull the scarecrow's hand off of his neck. With its other hand, the scarecrow pried open Brian's mouth. The thin line that formed the scarecrow's smile expanded until its mouth was a gaping hole that covered most of its face. Brian made a muffled scream as straws shot out of the scarecrow's mouth into his own. He gagged and choked. The straw poured down Brian's throat. It filled his body until it burst through its skin. As layers of straw spread over Brian, transforming his appearance, the scarecrows turned towards me. I shut the door to my apartment and bolted it behind me. In the crack beneath the door, shadows of legs approached. The door jostled, the same way the door to my bedroom was jostled periodically for the last several hours as the handle shook. Then my shadows departed. I didn't know what to do. After what I'd seen at the court building, I wasn't eager to contact the authorities. A familiar voice called me from the outside. I checked my phone to confirm that it was the correct date and time. Using the peephole, I saw that it was only Margaret, with no straw hat to be found on her. Relieved, I ushered her in. She asked me what was going on, what was wrong, after I frantically locked the door behind me. "I'm just so happy to see you," I replied. "You're the only thing that seems real to me." She looked at me strangely. I wasn't supposed to call her by her real name. She asked for some wine. Anne loved wine, after all. That trait was in the materials I'd provided to Margaret. I gave her a glass. She lifted it. I put my hand around hers as I poured. I thought about recent events, about how everything around me was falling apart. Yet, amidst all of it, here was Margaret, showing up at her scheduled time to pretend to be the wife who'd stormed out of my marriage a long time ago, who'd taken away my kids, who told me that I had no heart, no soul, who said that I was a dull and ugly and lifeless. Margaret shrieked as the glass shattered. I'd been gripping it too hard, and several fragments had torn into Margaret's hand. I apologized profusely. When I brought her a set of bandages, she opened her hand to reveal a long gash that extended across her palm. What I saw sent me darting into my bedroom, where I've been hiding, cowering ever since. You see no blood emerge from the wound, just the end of thin, golden pieces of straw. The end. The scarecrow wore blue overalls on a plaid shirt. It's faced. It's faced. This has been Gray Stories. I hoped you liked